Some objects are meant to be forgotten, but some things refuse to be left behind. For as long as Sarah could remember, the doll had been a part of her childhood. It had button eyes, a delicate porcelain face, and a hand-stitched blue dress with lace trimming. A gift from her grandmother. Something meant to be loved. But even as a child, Sarah had never loved it. She remembered playing with it once or twice, but something about the doll had always made her uneasy. Maybe it was the way its eyes seemed to follow her around the room, or how, when she placed it on the shelf, it never seemed to be in the exact same position when she looked at it again. It was supposed to be a pull-string doll. When she first got it, she would pull the cord on its back, and it would say simple phrases. "I love you, Mommy. Let's play a game. Will you be my best friend?" But one day the voice box broke. Or maybe it just stopped working. Sarah had pulled the string one last time, expecting its usual cheerful response. But instead, silence. After that, the doll sat untouched. For years. Eventually, her parents packed it away in a box, stuffed it in the attic, and that was that. A toy she had outgrown, forgotten, buried beneath dust and old memories. Until now. Moving back home. Sarah had moved out years ago, started her own life, built a home away from the house she grew up in. But when her mother fell ill, she returned, just for a little while, helping around the house, clearing out old storage, cleaning the attic. And that was when she found it. She had been sorting through boxes when her fingers brushed something soft. A blue dress, the fabric stiff with age. She pulled it out slowly. And there it was, the doll, staring up at her with its glassy, unmoving eyes. The dust coated its face. The once white lace of its dress had turned a dull gray. She had nearly forgotten it existed. And now, after all these years, it was in her hands again. Sarah sighed, shaking her head. It was just an old toy, a piece of her childhood, something harmless. She placed it on a shelf in her room, not because she wanted to keep it, but because she didn't know what else to do with it. She would get rid of it later. She should have done it then. Because that night, the doll spoke. Some things are meant to be silent. Some things should never wake up. But when they do, it's already too late. That night, Sarah was exhausted. She had spent the entire day cleaning, sorting, and packing away old memories. By the time she climbed into bed, the house was completely silent. Her parents were asleep down the hall. The only sound was the faint hum of the wind outside. A stillness that felt unnatural, like the house itself was waiting. She turned on her side, staring at the wall. Her eyes were heavy. Sleep came quickly, deep, dreamless, until something woke her. The first sound at first, Sarah thought it was a part of her dream, a soft, distant sound. Barely there. But as she slowly blinked awake, her body tensed. Because the noise wasn't stopping. It was real. She held her breath, listened. It was faint. A whisper, a voice, muffled, distant, but coming from inside the house. Her heart pounded. She sat up slowly. The darkness in the room felt too deep, too still. She swallowed hard, straining her ears, trying to figure out where the voice was coming from. And then she realized it was coming from the hallway, from just outside her bedroom door. Sarah clenched the blankets. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She forced herself to listen harder. And this time, she heard it. Clear, undeniable. A tiny voice, software childlike. And it was calling out. "Mommy?" Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She froze. Body locked in place. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Because that voice, that soft, innocent voice, did not belong to anyone in this house. The fear sets. Her parents were asleep. No children lived here. And yet, The voice sounded so small, so close, as if it was standing right outside her door. Sarah's hands curled into fists. She felt paralyzed. Part of her wanted to get up, to check the hallway, to prove she was just hearing things. But her instincts screamed at her to stay still. Then it spoke again. "Mommy, I'm still here." Sarah's stomach dropped. Her body went ice cold. Because now she recognized the voice. She had heard it before, years ago, a sound she had nearly forgotten, a sound she never should have heard again. It was the doll, the same high-pitched, sing-song tone it used to have when she pulled the string, the same voice box that had broken 10 years ago. And yet, here it was, speaking. The silence that followed. The air in the room felt heavy, like something was pressing down on her chest. She clenched the blankets tighter, waited, listened. But after that second phrase, the voice stopped. The house was silent again, as if nothing had ever happened, as if it hadn't spoken at all. Sarah forced herself to breathe. Her hands were clammy, her pulse hammered in her skull. Maybe she had imagined it. Maybe she was dreaming. She turned, looked across the room, and that's when she saw it. The doll had moved. It was supposed to be on the shelf. That's where she had left it. That's where it had been all day. But now it was sitting in the chair by the window, perfectly upright. Its small porcelain hands folded neatly in its lap, its button eyes staring at her. Sarah's stomach turned. She sat there frozen, heart racing, trying to rationalize. Had she moved it? Had she forgotten? Had someone else come in? Number that wasn't possible. She would have heard them, felt them, and besides, the chair was facing her, like the doll had been watching her sleep, like it had been waiting for her to wake up. She needed proof. She had to know if this was real, if she was losing her mind. So she grabbed her phone from the nightstand, opened the camera app, and set it up to record. If this was just her imagination, then nothing would happen, and she could finally put this fear to rest. But deep down, she knew. She already knew. Something wasn't right, and by morning, she would have proof. Proof that some things should never be found again. Proof that some things never stay silent forever. Some things are better left unseen. Some things you were never meant to hear. Sarah didn't sleep for the rest of the night. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined the soft, childlike voice whispering in the dark. Every time she tried to convince herself it wasn't real. Her gaze drifted toward the chair, toward the doll, its tiny button eyes reflecting the faint moonlight. Still, unmoving, watching, checking the footage. By the time the first light of morning seeped through the window, Sarah's exhaustion had settled deep in her bones, but she needed to check the recording, needed to see if she was losing her mind. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand, her fingers trembling as she opened the video. 8 hours of footage. She scrolled through quickly, nothing but stillness, darkness, until 3:14 a.m., the moment everything changed. The voice on the tape. She pressed play. At first, there was only silence. The low hum of the house at night. A creak of the wooden floors as the house settled. Then, a soft sound, barely above a whisper. So faint she almost missed it. But when she turned the volume up, her heart stopped. "Mommy?" A voice, a tiny, delicate voice, coming from inside the room. Sarah's breath hitched. She pressed the phone closer to her ear. And then, the voice spoke again. "Don't leave me alone again." Sarah dropped the phone. Her chest tightened. Her hands shook. This wasn't possible. The doll had no voice box, no speaker, no way to make a sound. But the recording didn't lie. She forced herself to keep listening. Seconds passed, then a minute, then 2. Silence. Maybe that was it. Maybe she had imagined the rest. But just as she was about to stop the video, something changed. The camera glitched. For a split second, the screen distorted. And then, through the static, through the grainy, dim footage, Sarah saw movement. The doll moved. Her breath caught. The chair, the one by the window. The doll had been sitting perfectly still. But now, in the footage, it shifted, just slightly, just enough. Its small porcelain hands twitched, its head tilted, and worst of all, its mouth moved. Not a glitch, not a mistake. Sarah rewound the footage. Again, again. Each time the same thing. The slight movement, the whisper, the slow, unnatural tilt of the head. It wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't a coincidence. It was real. And Sarah had proof. She should have stopped there, should have deleted the recording, should have burned the doll right then and there. But she didn't. She needed more answers. And to get them, she had to find out where the doll had really come from. Some objects hold memories, some hold something else. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands gripping a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She hadn't slept. Couldn't. Not after what she had seen. Not after hearing that tiny voice whisper her name. She tried to convince herself it wasn't real, tried to come up with a logical explanation. But the footage didn't lie. And now, there was only one question left. Where did the doll come from? Searching for answers. She pulled out her laptop, fingers trembling as she started to type. She searched for hours, antique dolls, defective voice boxes, paranormal cases, anything that could explain what she had witnessed. But nothing fit, nothing made sense. Then, she thought of something she hadn't considered before. Her grandmother's old things. The doll had been a gift, something her grandmother had given her as a child. But where had she gotten it? Had it belonged to someone else before Sarah? Had it ever been someone else's? She hesitated, then stood. Her heart pounded as she made her way upstairs, to the attic, to the place where the past had been left to gather dust. The chest in the attic. The attic was cold. Dim light filtered through the single dusty window. Sarah coughed, pushing past old furniture and forgotten boxes. Then, she saw it, an old wooden chest in the corner, the same one her grandmother used to keep her most treasured possessions, locked, sealed, undisturbed. Until now. She knelt beside it. Her fingers shook as she tried to pry it open. It wouldn't budge. She checked the sides, the hinges, the lid. And then, just as she was about to give up, her hand brushed against something metallic. A key, lying just beside the chest, waiting. She swallowed, gripped the key, slid it into the lock, and slowly turned. The chest creaked as it opened, and inside she found something she never expected. The photograph. Lying on top of old yellowed papers was a single black and white photograph. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, because in the image was a young girl, no older than 6, holding the doll, the same blue dress, the same button eyes, and on the back of the photo written in shaky handwriting, 5 words. She still whispers at night. Sarah stumbled back. Her pulse raced. The attic felt smaller, tighter, like the walls were closing in. She turned the photograph over again, staring at the girl's face. Who was she? And why? Why did she look so familiar? The name that changed everything. She dug deeper into the chest, frantically pulling out papers, old letters, journals. Anything that could tell her more. And then she found it, an old birth certificate. The name on it, Eleanor Carter. Sarah froze. The last name, her family, whoever this girl was. She was connected to her. But how? The doll's first owner. Sarah's mind spun. She grabbed her phone, started searching. She typed in the name, Eleanor Carter. She expected nothing. But then, an old newspaper article appeared. Her stomach twisted as she read the headline. Missing girl's case remains unsolved. Eleanor Carter, age 6, disappeared without a trace. The date of disappearance. The year, 1952. The place, the same house Sarah was standing in. Her childhood home. Her family's home. This girl, this missing child, had lived here, had played in these same rooms, had slept in her bedroom. And the last time she was seen, she had been holding the doll. Sarah's body went cold. Her breath came faster. The doll had belonged to Eleanor. And Eleanor had never been found, had never come home. But the doll had. The last journal entry. At the bottom of the chest, buried beneath old newspaper clippings and forgotten memories, was a small, leather-bound book, a diary, her grandmother's. She flipped through the pages, her hands shaking, scanning words, falling deeper, until she found the last entry. And when she read it, her stomach dropped. The whispers have started again. I hear her voice at night. I thought she was gone. I thought she had finally moved on. But she's still here. She's waiting. And she wants her doll back. Sarah's hands went numb. The diary slipped from her fingers, hit the floor with a soft thud. She could barely breathe, barely think. Because if this was real, if Eleanor Carter had never left, then that meant one thing. The doll wasn't just a toy. It was a piece of her, a tether, a way for Eleanor to find her way back. And last night, she did. Sarah stumbled back toward the attic door. Her mind screamed to get out, to run, to burn the doll, to get rid of it before it was too late. But as she reached the top of the stairs, as her foot hovered over the first step, a sound froze her in place, a giggle, software childlike, coming from the attic. Sarah's breath hitched. She turned slowly, her pulse hammering against her ribs. And there, in the dim attic light, sitting right where she had left it, was the doll. Its head had tilted slightly. Its hands, once folded neatly in its lap, were now resting on the attic floor, like it had moved, like it had been waiting. And from the darkness, a voice whispered, "You found me. Some things should stay lost. Some things should never be found. Because once you see them, they see you too." Sarah stood frozen at the top of the attic stairs. The air felt thick, heavy. The dust swirling in the dim light made it hard to breathe. And sitting in the center of the attic, exactly where she had left it, was the doll. It hadn't moved, not really. But something was different. Its head, tilted just slightly to the side, its tiny hands resting on the floor instead of in its lap. And then she heard it. A soft giggle, a whisper, coming from the doll. "You found me." Sarah stumbled back. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. She wanted to run, wanted to throw the doll out the window, set it on fire, get as far away from it as possible. But she couldn't move. Because deep inside, she knew it wouldn't matter. It would always come back. The decision to destroy it. Sarah forced herself to breathe. Her fingers clenched into fists. She had to end this. Whatever this was, whatever was inside that doll, it couldn't stay. She snatched it up, gripping it by its tiny porcelain arms. The doll felt too warm, as if it had been held by someone else just moments before. Its dress smelled faintly of dust and something else, something old. But she didn't stop, didn't hesitate. She ran down the attic stairs, into the living room, and straight to the fireplace. She grabbed the box of matches, struck one, watched as the tiny flame flickered to life, and then, without thinking, she threw the doll into the fire. The fire and the doll's final words. The fabric caught quickly. The blue dress curled into ash, the porcelain face blackened, cracked. The tiny button eyes melted into nothing, and for the first time in decades, Sarah felt relief. It was over. It had to be. But just as she turned away, just as she let herself breathe, a voice rose from the flames, software whispering, not from her own mind, not from the house, but from inside the fire itself. "You can't get rid of me." Sarah's entire body seized. Her breath came ragged, shallow. Her fingers gripped the mantelpiece so hard her knuckles turned white. She forced herself to turn back, forced herself to watch. But there was nothing left, just ash, just embers, just the faint scent of burned fabric and something far, far worse. The aftermath. But is it really over? For the first time in days, Sarah slept. Not peacefully, not deeply. But sleep came nonetheless. And when she woke the next morning, for the first time in years, the house was silent. No whispers, no giggles, no tiny voices calling out from the dark. It was finally over. At least, that's what she thought. The last warning. A week passed, then two. Sarah moved out of the house, left behind everything that tied her to that awful place. But no matter where she went, no matter how far she traveled, the feeling never left. The feeling of being watched, the feeling of being followed. And then, one night, she got a package in the mail. No return address, no sender, just a plain, unmarked box. She opened it with shaking hands, pulled aside the tissue paper, and inside was a doll. Not the same one, but similar. Too similar. The same button eyes, the same stitched smile, the same soft blue dress, and sitting on top of it, folded neatly like a message left just for her, was a piece of paper with only 3 words. "You found me. The end."